So I suppose,
We are at straight up 7 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the Forage webinar affiliated with I-29 and Plains Forage Group. Uh, we do these once a month, and Amber wants to go ahead and have her presentation up. I will make the introduction. Uh, Amber Frederickson is the editor of the Hayes Forge River magazine. Folks don't look at that on a regular basis. They should. She can give us an overview of our self-growing conditions. She's seen some harvest results from the crop so far this year. She will light on that. As I always say, Amber, the podium is yours.
All right, thank you, Fred, and thanks for having me tonight at this Forage webinar series. Um, like Fred said, I just kind of created a little overview of forages for you guys. So my goal for the presentation was just to kind of provide what I've been seeing in the field, what I've been writing about for hay and forage grower, what I've been reporting on, just kind of stuff that's come across my desk as we kind of kicked off the growing season and the hay harvest season so far this year. So, oh, it's not letting me. There we go. Little outline of my presentation here. I just feel like there's no better way to start off a discussion about forages and harvest season than by talking about some of our weather patterns. I also don't want to step on your toes, Fred, but I have a little bit of information here on hay stocks and hay prices and what we've been reporting on at Hay and Forage Grower. I also threw in some early season forage quality data that I pulled from the Rock River Laboratory database. I also have some anecdotes and a couple of stories from a couple of recent trips I've made, some of my forage observations on hay farms and livestock farms, as well as a couple of current issues, maybe not issues in a problematic sense, but issues as far as just newsworthy items go. Um, so, like I said, to start out here, just with a look at some precipitation maps. These come from the High Plains Regional Climate Center. I tried to zoom out so I could account for all the viewing areas that the webinar here represents today. So just kind of a look at the Midwest. On the left is just precipitation in inches for the past 30 days. I did pull this a couple days ago. So basically for the first month of the growing season. You can see precipitation here compared to the departure from normal on the right. It's a little bit more colorful when we look at departure from normal, especially that central part of Iowa that seems to have received a little bit more rain than the rest of the state, as well as those two counties in eastern Iowa. Looks like Clinton County and Scott County. And then central Minnesota looks pretty wet too. And I would just maybe anticipate that those areas, if farmers were trying to cut hay, maybe got delayed by rain, um, especially compared to those spots of northeastern Iowa and southern Wisconsin and northern Illinois, where it was maybe a little bit drier. Maybe hay harvest was underway a little bit more efficiently in those regions. Also wanted to include just a look at the U.S. Drought Monitor for reference. This was as of June 10th. Looks relatively tame, I would say, especially compared to drought monitor maps that we've seen before, just dealing with some abnormally dry and moderately dry conditions throughout Iowa, northern Illinois. One thing I did want to add is at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association meeting earlier this year in February that I attended. Matt Makins is a meteorologist who speaks there every year, and he always gives an update on the forecast for El Nino and La Nina weather patterns that we so love to anticipate. And it was looking like a fairly neutral year. If anything, conditions seem to maybe err on the side of a La Nina year, which favors more dry weather patterns. And Matt Makins, this meteorologist, uses different modeling patterns to create moisture maps and precipitation maps, which he predicted above average rain overall throughout the summer, although that would possibly include what he called flash droughts. So maybe those shorter term, harder hitting droughts that kind of can just develop throughout the growing season. So that's just something to be aware of. I know it's probably already in the back of everyone's mind anyway. But I didn't want to include any long-term forecasts because it's just hard to predict those, and I'm not a meteorologist, so I wanted to stay away from that. But moving on here was just a couple notes on hay stocks. USDA released their May 1 hay stocks report recently last month, and May 1 hay stocks for the year across the US are at 24.1 million tons. So that was 15% higher year over year, and it was also the highest May 1 hay stocks since 2017, as you can see in this graph here. And along with hay stock data, USDA also reports hay disappearance. So that's hay leaving the barn, or the US hay barn all over the country from December 1 through May 1st. And hay disappearance for this period was 57.4 million tons since December, and that was also higher. And that's primarily through feeding hay. So I just wanted to note those two statistics. Also, that hay stocks being higher just means that there's higher supply, and that leads to my next point, which is hay prices, which have been sitting very low for a long period of time. Hay prices can be pretty cyclical in nature, except this year they just didn't hit their stride and they didn't hit that up cycle. So they've just been hanging out really kind of record lows for a while. But I will note that hay prices are a pretty regional phenomenon, so they're very dependent on weather and water availability that affect harvest, and consequently affect supply and demand. Hay prices are also influenced by competitively priced commodities. So if there's other ingredients that farmers can substitute that protein and energy in animal diets that is cheaper than available hay, they might do that. And another factor of regional hay prices are beef prices, which are pretty strong in the market right now. And that's also causing a slow rebuild of the US beef herd. I didn't put this in my slide here, but the US dairy herd is also sitting at pretty steady numbers. So there's not necessarily any more mouths to feed. And with higher hay stocks, we've sitting on a lot more hay. So those are some things that might explain low hay prices at the moment. It's reasonable to expect these prices remain low for the foreseeable future, unless there's some sort of sudden trigger, like a sudden drought that might spur those into action a little bit more. And for those reasons, I just want to advocate that farmers, you know, your cost of production. So if you're producing hay and you're selling hay and that's how you're making your living, just know what those costs of production are, as well as cost of inputs, just so that you can be competitively priced and make a profit. And I know Iowa State University has a pretty nifty estimated cost of production worksheet available, just so that you can plug in those numbers and just have an estimate in front of you to help you price your product. I just wanted to include two hay market mantras that we share at Hay and Forage Grower. And one is that high quality hay always sells for a premium price, and it doesn't cost anymore to make them poor quality hay. And also, like I said earlier, hay markets are largely a regional phenomenon. So that has to do a lot with local weather, water availability, precipitation that affects supply, and along with that, predominant enterprises in your local region will affect demand. So whether that's dairy or beef or horses, that's going to kind of paint the picture for your regional hay market. So moving on, I just wanted to touch quickly on some forage quality data. Again, this comes from Rock River Laboratory, and it's pretty early in the season to be, coming up with averages and getting enough hay samples. So I just wanted to put that out there as a disclaimer that these comparisons from year to year might be a little hard to compare before we get any more cuttings under our belt and any more samples. But these two graphs here represent neutral detergent fiber levels of haylage and dry hay so far in samples from this 2025 growing season compared to the 2024 growing season. So as you can see, both graphs just kind of have a wider bell curve for that 2025 sample so far this year. Again, hopefully that becomes a little more comparable or accurate with more data throughout the year. This next slide looks pretty similar, except I just grabbed data for total digestible nutrients in haylage and dry hay so far this year. And again, kind of a similar story, kind of a wider spread of data, erring on the side of lower TDN. But again, that might even itself out as we go on throughout the year. Switching gears here a little bit, I wanted to kind of share some recent forage observations with the webinar here. Um, Every year, our editorial staff takes a photo trip. So we take a week out of the office and we pick a state in the Midwest to basically just get out on as many farms as we can. Our primary goal is to get pictures to use with articles in Hay and Forage Grower magazines and our weekly newsletter throughout the year. But at the same time, we're talking to farmers, we're gathering farm stories, and we're just kind of taking notes on what we're seeing this first part of the growing season. So it's a great way to get some boots on the ground. And when Fred called me to line up this webinar, I thought that'd be a great timing because I'd just be getting back from this trip where I'm out and about seeing things firsthand. So this year we went through central Illinois and northeastern Missouri. We stopped at kind of a variety of hay farms, beef farms, dairy farms, and we were on the road that week after Memorial Day. So it was May 27th through the 30th. Overall, my three probably greatest takeaways from the trip was that in that region, that central Illinois and eastern Missouri region, their first cutting of alfalfa was delayed pretty significantly. And I thought that was kind of surprising because leading up to this trip, I'd already seen a lot of hay down in southern Wisconsin and northeastern Iowa. I think even as early as May 9th and 10th, I'd seen people cutting and baling hay in those regions. So it kind of surprised me that these farms further south were delayed like they were. In addition to hay harvest, we also got to see some pretty unique rotational grazing setups and a pretty beautiful stand of spring seeded alfalfa, which I'll talk a little bit more later in my slides. So regarding those delayed first cuttings, this was a farmer from Compton, Illinois, so just kind of the center of the state. And he had yet to really get his first cutting of alfalfa underway. He was nice enough on the day that we visited to cut pretty small stand of alfalfa just so we could fire up our cameras and get some photos. This was maybe a few acres worth, but he wasn't about to venture into any other fields because the weatherman was calling for rain overnight and he wasn't going to risk that hay getting rained on before it was baled. So that was a good call on his part because they ended up getting 3/10 of rain overnight, which was kind of a you know, a story that far into the growing season. It seemed to be happening a lot. Um, and at this point in the stand, alfalfa was already in bloom. I can't say what percentage of the field was in bloom stage, but as you can see in the center photo here, there are already some purple and blue flowers popping up. So probably already past the point of optimum quality. But for this guy's purposes, he wasn't shooting for dairy quality for any reason. But if you were, that might not have been the best situation to be in with delayed harvest. Um, so the next day we were at a dairy a little farther south in Illinois, and the dairy farmer there kind of told a similar story. They usually wrap up their first cutting of hay about the first week of May, but at this point, when we were there on May 28th, they had just finished. So usually about the time they start their second cutting of alfalfa, they were just wrapping up their first cutting. And the farmer wasn't necessarily happy about that, but they were also grazing their dairy cattle. Is a grazing Jersey farm. And one thing that I just couldn't look past in those pastures was the prevalence of buttercup. Um, and I had come across an article from Ohio State University Extension just about the same time, where farmers were reporting a higher prevalence of buttercup in their pastures. Don't know if any of you guys on the panel are seeing that or dealing with that, but some of the reasons that buttercup is just kind of taking over is if pastures were overgrazed last year during a drought in those bare spots. It just kind of created an opportunity for buttercup to establish there. And then if pastures experience a little bit more rain this spring, that extra moisture would have really allowed it to take off. So there's really nothing you can do at this point. It's too late to control. Buttercup's a weed that you need to spray early if you're going to spray it before seed develops. But yeah, that was just kind of the highlight or maybe low light of that day of my road trip. I won't spend too long talking about this stand of native warm season grasses, but it was a pretty impressive stand. I've heard a lot about native warm season grasses, but I see them implemented less frequently. But this farmer in Missouri had a beef herd, and he had dedicated some of his tall fescue acres to native warm season grasses. So he had terminated tall fescue and seeded big blue stem, little blue stem, and Indian grass, um, and was putting cattle out on those acres just as a part of his grazing rotation, but also when tall fescue kind of hits its summer slump and goes dormant in the heat of the summer, he was going to utilize those fields to just have some extra forage available. Um, which is kind of a similar sentiment to what might be a little bit more common in our neck of the woods, and that is planting a warm season annual crop to kind of take the pressure off those cool season pastures during the summer slump when forage productivity slows down. So I just thought I'd add that in there too. There's options for summer grazing and summer forage availability, and it's not too late to start thinking about establishing those summer annuals if that's something that would help you provide, more grazing days or extend grazing into the later season. So those are usually forage sorghum, sorghum sudan grass, even types of millet. Those are all options. So that's my plug for alternative forages. And here is that spring seeded stand of alfalfa that I mentioned earlier. It was just very impressive. I don't think I've seen such a prolific spring seeded stand of alfalfa like that before. This was at a farm in Missouri, a dairy farm there. Um, and I think one of the reasons it was just impressive is because spring seeded alfalfa deals with more challenges than late summer seeding of alfalfa. Usually planting can be delayed by rain. And if seed does get in the ground, it's more likely to be flooded out in the spring than it would be in late summer or fall. Spring seedings of alfalfa can also um, be deterred by crusting, which can hinder emergence, and then excess moisture and lower temperatures in the spring can also cause a higher prevalence of seedling disease. So it's kind of heartening to see a successfully spring seeded stand. Um, One thing I didn't notice in this field though was the use of a nurse crop. So no peas or oats or whatever farmers sometimes use to enhance that first year forage yield, because spring seeded stands will have lower first year yields compared to a stand that's seeded in late summer or fall. So that's one benefit of using a nurse crop, is if forage supplies are low and farmers anticipate maybe needing a boost there. But nurse crops can also create some competition with seedlings. So it's kind of hit or miss. It's kind of whatever your goals are, whether or not a nurse crop is warranted. But in this case, they didn't need one and it looked just fine. So that kind of concludes my observations from that particular trip. And I just wanted to kind of run through a couple of quick hitters of just couple of topics that I've covered recently. And this first one here kind of ties back to the topic of rained on hay that I discussed a little bit earlier. And that is, to ted hay or not to ted hay. This was a question that was asked to me, which is a little bit different because sometimes I feel like I'm usually asking all the questions. Whether or not it's necessarily required or useful to ted hay. And of course, the answer to that is it depends. For the most part, tedding hay is more common for grass hay. It's really not popular for alfalfa production just because, the mechanical manipulation of tedding causes alfalfa leaf shatter and leaf loss just because of the way those leaves are connected to plants. You don't have that with grass hay. Grass hay leaves are pretty securely attached. Um, but the usefulness of tedding is that it's just an extra step in between cutting hay and raking that kind of facilitates a faster dry down. So it disperses hay over a wider area, creates a larger surface area for more sunlight interception and solar radiation to dry that hay down a little faster. In some cases, it can cut a day off of your dry down time. And it also inverts that bottom layer of hay to the top. So you get more consistent moisture throughout the field, more consistent bale moisture when you end up baling it. Um, but I would just say one thing to consider if tedding is an option for you, would just be weighing those costs of operation, fuel costs, time, labor. Maybe you don't even have a tedder and you need to rent one. And comparing those to what you're saving. If you're trying to get hay off the field before it rains, that might be worth your time and your money. Maybe thinking about the protein or energy that you would lose if hay did get rained on before it was baled, and maybe valuing those. Sorry, I received a message. Um, I'll keep going here. And then, yeah, so it'll depend for every operation and whatever you have available. So when tedding is not a part of your routine or you don't want it to be, just a couple of general harvesting tips here. Is that forage maturity drives quality. Cutting earlier is the single most significant way to improve your forage quality, and that comes from Kim Cassida at Michigan State University. I pulled that quote from her in an article there, and that's pretty well known. The earlier you cut, the higher quality your forage will be. Um, But post-harvest dry matter losses primarily occur from plant respiration. Plants continue to respire until they hit that critical moisture threshold after drying, and you'll also incur some losses if hay gets rained on. So overall, the faster forage dries down, the better. And one way to do this and to do this well is by creating wide swaths from the back of the mower. So laying forage down, and by wide swath, I mean 60 to 70% of the width of that cutter bar. And doing this can reduce drying time by up to 24 hours. It has been noted. One more thing I just wanted to note is that quality changes leading up to first cutting are more rapid than what they will be in subsequent cuttings. So I have a note here that a Wisconsin study found that alfalfa relative feed value can decline anywhere from 2.7 to 7.5 points per day leading up to first cutting. But just a note that that won't be as rapid, or most likely won't be as rapid for second, third, and any future cutting. So it's still important to stay on top of forage quality and staying ahead of that, but maybe less pressure as we move forward in the harvest season. One more resource I just wanted to point out that I enjoy using is the University of Minnesota Extension Alfalfa Harvest Alert Program. They use the predicted equations for alfalfa quality to estimate first cut quality. They send out a report every couple days. As you can see here in this image, there's all the data as well as a graph to just show how your quality could be declining if that's something that lines up for you and is comparable. And then just real quick, I know I'm possibly running short on time, but one newsworthy item that I came across shortly before this presentation today was the talk of alfalfa weevils. I got an email from University of Minnesota Extension. Anthony Hansen had written, and it kind of surprised me because I haven't heard a lot about alfalfa weevils so far this season. And I guess that's rightfully so because Anthony wrote that there's been relatively slow progress in the alfalfa weevil season compared to previous years. As you can see in this picture down here at the right, this was a photo I took in June of last year when alfalfa weevil seemed to be running rampant. And a lot of producers I talked to were actually spraying for it. Whereas this year it seems like even though there's frequent reports of alfalfa weevil in alfalfa fields, many of them are not to the economic injury threshold level that warrant a insecticide application. So many farmers shouldn't need to spray, especially at this point. Alfalfa weevils should maybe be nearing the end of their feeding cycle, but I would say it's still worth scouting through June, especially if there's any stragglers that are left behind, and especially in fields where alfalfa feeding is prevalent, but not to that threshold. Maybe just keep an eye on it for the rest of the month. And that is kind of all I have for you guys. In summary, I know those precipitation maps didn't really share a lot of specific information. It looked decent in some areas. Other areas were probably impacted by rain and experienced some delayed hay cutting. Other areas were doing just fine. So just again, wanted to mention that hay stocks are up, hay prices are down. Not the most rosy combination, but just the current state of the hay market right now. And for that reason, just be diligent in estimating your cost of production when you're pricing hay, selling hay, staying up on that, and then be prepared for second, third, fourth cuttings yet this season. And again, continue scouting for alfalfa weevil and whatever other pests might pop up yet this summer. One last picture I just thought I'd share from the farm in Missouri. I got to spend some time with a longhorn beef cow in those native warm season grass pastures. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach me by email listed here. Also, I'm available by phone call, but Yeah, thanks again for your time and for having me on the webinar.
Thank you very much, Amber. I always appreciate the information you bring to these webinars. Uh, Sarah, do you have any questions? We've got a small group. I think we can just kind of go ahead and get them as we go along.
Yeah, I thought that was great, Amber. I actually was just kind of enjoying your pictures. I need to do that. Just go out and take some pictures throughout the year. Um, your comments about alfalfa being behind were very true here too. We had such a dry fall, and I'm not sure the situation exactly where you were, but dry fall, dry winter. And so a lot of people have cut late. And lately, I've been talking to growers who seem really disappointed in their first cutting tonnage wise. Not only was it late, like not as far along as they typically cut it, but they wanted to get it cut, but it really wasn't super high production. And I think the biggest issue here is just moisture. We did get some moisture this spring finally, but it was a day late and a dollar short for alfalfa. So I don't know if you've seen that around. I'd be curious to know if there was more of that in other areas.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, aside from those Illinois, Missouri farms we were at, I've spent a lot of time driving back and forth between southern Wisconsin and eastern Iowa. And for the most part, I've been kind of impressed by first cutting. It seems like it was kind of going off without a hitch in those areas. I guess I
Mhm.
don't know exactly yield wise if people were happy with it, but timing wise, it seemed pretty efficient. So, yeah, maybe that was just better forecast, better luck in those
Yeah,
regions.
I mean, I'm sure the area is different. Most of the South Dakota started dry, last fall already. So I think it was a,
But Sarah, I'm hearing the same things here in central Minnesota. They're a little disappointed in first cutting,
yeah,
even if they got it up timing wise,
yeah,
and I think our weather was okay, but at least here, I would tend to agree with you. I think they were kind of surprised. I think they were expecting maybe a little better yields than they had. And, they weren't horrible, but
yeah,
but I would agree with you, and I don't know if it was we were so wet last year, we had compaction, or we didn't have the dryness that you guys did. I mean, we had a dry fall, but I don't know. But I hear the same thing you do, Sarah. That's maybe kind of disappointing. I mean, not horrible
yeah.
again, but
Mostly environmental, I think, but just kind of
yeah,
disappointing.
yeah. No winter kill. I mean, there's really none of that, so just disappointing in the yield.
While you were traveling in Missouri, one of the things when I lived down there that just blew me away was a hybrid crabgrass from Dalrymple Seed House. Saw a lot of that in southern half of Missouri. Did you see any of that? Have any opportunity to wrap your head around it?
No, I didn't see any crabgrass, but I also didn't get super far south into Missouri. And I know a lot of dairies are in that southwest corner of the state, so that probably would have been a good opportunity to see that. But I don't know. I think I know farmers like crabgrass. If they like it, they like it.
Well, just when you mentioned warm season grass, I know uh, Fred Dalrymple had sent me seed and we put it in. And man, it was amazing. It did grow well, it handled stress well. The only thing that really gets ugly about it is when it cures out and you roll it up, that bale will turn almost black. And you would think there's no room that would touch it. But I've seen my silly shorthorn cows leave an alfalfa bale and dig in to that crabgrass bed and do well. So I just was curious if you'd seen it because it really left an imprint on me. The other thing I was wondering that I've heard a couple producers talk to me about was first cutting late, not quite what they expected. And their older stands aren't coming back the way they normally do in their minds. You heard anybody else mention some older stand stress?
I guess not in particular, but that poses a good question to ask moving forward. Maybe taking stock on older stands and how they're holding up. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, as we move through this evening, we may get some more questions, but I'm saying let's go ahead and move on to our next presenter. Uh, Phil Katz is Michigan State University. Phil, if you want to go ahead and load your presentation on.
Okay, give me a second here.
Phil is Michigan State University forage and field crops educator. Uh, he had an article that really caught my mind and caught my interest when he was talking about safety when working around round bales. You know, we all get in a hurry, and that's when we see the ambulance show up on farms. So I thought this time of the year, that's going to be a fantastic opportunity to kind of get back to reality with it. So, Phil, the podium is yours.
Thanks so much, Fred, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this webinar series. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I work across the state of Michigan as a forage educator, primarily with alfalfa and grass mixes, as well as with corn silage on the dairy side. And then I also spend a fair amount of time working with all the other crops in the thumb of Michigan, which is pretty diverse. So I'll have things like corn, soybeans, wheat, dry beans. We'll have sugar beets. We'll have a lot of cover crop action in this area. So it's really a pretty diverse area when it comes to working with farmers and seeing a lot of things. But I've got a lot of passion when it comes to forages. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about forages and forage safety, because to me, there's never a bad time to talk about being safe on the farm. So, of course, you've heard this before, but MSU Extension is open to all, and we'll just go to the next slide. One of the things that caught my attention was I wonder if we have farms that are using or buying older baling equipment. Now, in Michigan, we have from beginning producers that are just starting out to experienced large acreage producers that have got a wealth of equipment that they work with on a regular basis. But it seems like those that are just starting out, a lot of times will buy used, older baling equipment. And I know that there's some good reasons for that. In fact, I encourage people to use and buy used equipment, especially if they're just starting out. So there are some motivations, and a lot of it has to do with the economics. As a beginning farmer, you have smaller acreages, and usually when you look at round balers, they're convenient, they're economical. It makes it nice because they can have one baler platform that they work with for efficiency. And then you've got some of those guys that have been able to fix anything on the farm, and boy, they can't fix it. They can't keep it going and maintain it. And sometimes all of this equipment is already owned. It's paid for. And that makes sense to me too, because economics is always a big part of farming and should be a big part of farming. Excuse me. But the emphasis on this story really started more than a year ago when I was asked to do a review of what they call a My Face assessment. And it was in association with the Department of Medicine and Occupational Environmental Medicine at MSU. And I'll get into some of the details on this as we go through. But it was all involving a new idea of 4854 round baler. Now, this baler was new in 1997. And this is right off their information that they have online as far as the brochure. It's a popular fixed chamber baler, 5x4s, bales up to 1,000 pounds, star-shaped soft inner core for internal drying. You can bale at slightly higher moisture levels, and you can boost your RFV. You can start earlier and bale later. Sounds great, right? Yeah, absolutely. At the time, it was great. And there's a lot of those balers still around. So I looked at that and I said, all right, how much does it cost to buy a used baler? And that new idea is just an example because it's part of this presentation. So I went online and I pulled some prices, and I just went anywhere that was selling older balers, I should say, and I said, how much do they cost? So the average cost for a used round baler from 95 to 99, and I found 32 models, sorry, averaged about $7,000 for the baler. Now, and I compared that to a used baler that was newer from 2020 to 2010, found 47 models, averaging 2016, so they'd be 9 years old or so, averaged about $28,800. So a difference of $21,700, 19 years. So about $1,100 a year for updating from an older to a newer baler. Okay. So, and then I asked the question, and I asked this of farmers when I make farm calls and talk to them, and I said, when is the right time to upgrade a baler? And I got a plethora of answers. One of them, when I can afford it. A lot of them, when it's no longer functional, I just can't fix it anymore. Some said now because it was time, or it's not in the cards. I can fix it. I can keep it going no matter what. But I want to say that there is a time to upgrade that baler. And as I talked about it, you'll find out why I bring this up. I'm not saying that that baler or any other baler is not safe or managed properly. I just want to say this information shouldn't be interpreted that this baler or any round baler should not be used or operated. I'm using it as an example. It's a general principle about safety and management. So let's go on. Let me start out by saying this is what I reviewed. Late summer of 2023, a 23-year-old male farm worker was employed to bale hay. The hay owner was not present when the worker started the job, but spoke to him on the phone that night just after 8 o'clock. The hay owner texted the worker asking he call when he finished that field because there was another field to be done. When the hay owner arrived at the field, this is what he found. He talked to the neighbor. The neighbor said he'd seen this 23-year-old 15, 20 minutes earlier. He walked out there. The engine was running at full idle. And so he shut her down, opened up the baler, and he found the 23-year-old inside the baler. I immediately called 911. This picture is taken right from the first responders that were there that night. When I talk to farmers, and it doesn't matter which farm, every farm, they all have a story. And that story sometimes, oh, it was a close call, or I cheated death, or it was something where I got hurt pretty significantly, or I lost a finger, or a hand, or an arm, or I got crushed or pulled into PTOs. All kinds of stories out there, but every farmer has a story. Well, this 23-year-old story ended tragically that night. I would hate to open up that baler and see the blood running out of it because that is something that I would never forget. Why did it happen? Well, there's a lot of reasons why. Rain was in the forecast. This young guy was in a hurry, probably. But I'm going to say that you can go fast, but you don't have to hurry. And it's one of those things where when we hurry, I think we miss steps that we should not necessarily miss. I'm sure it plugged. I'm sure he got off the tractor thinking I'll just get this unplugged real quick. I'll get going. I'll beat that rain. Well, obviously he didn't beat the rain. And it's one of those things where as I read this, it kind of made me sick to my stomach as I thought about the impact that it had on everybody on that farm, the 23-year-old's family, the hay owner's family, the neighbor's family, everybody that saw and witnessed this tragedy on a farm that could have been prevented. And I'm going to give some things that I think are important as far as things that should have been done that weren't done. Always disengage the PTO and shut off the tractor engine before inspecting, servicing, or unplugging the baler. Farmers will scoff at me when I say that, shutting down the tractor. I've had guys working on choppers with the engine running and a 4-year-old up in the cab, and I just about choked when I saw that, and I pulled that 4-year-old out of the cab. He could have been killed instantly, but he didn't shut it down. Always shut it down. Always disengage the PTO. Shut off the tractor. It's in all the information. Today, the new safety equipment that's there on tractors, they have a switch in the seat to make sure that when you get off, that PTO shuts off. And that's the difference between an old baler and a new baler. Yes, you can disengage those and you can bypass them, but I'm here to say that there's a cost to doing that. Recommendation number 2, farm equipment operators should complete hazard recognition and control training for the equipment they operate and demonstrate competency and ability to operate under conditions of the work location. This 23-year-old had owned that equipment. It was his baler. He owned the equipment for several years, and so I assume that he knew exactly what to do and how to do things. But yet, maybe he needed just a little more training. Don't bypass that step. If you own a farm, you have people working with you and under you, whether it's family or hired help that's on the farm, that labor is working with you and for you, take that step, take that time to make sure to do the proper training. Recommendation number 3, farms should develop and put in place written safety operating procedures for equipment and provide training on procedures to any farm worker before being allowed to operate the equipment unsupervised. I can go on practically any farm and say, do you have safety procedures? And they'll say, absolutely. I say, are they written down? And crickets. Or, yeah, I think so. Sure. When's the last time you reviewed those? Well, we don't do it all the time. Well, those are some of the things that need to be done on a regular basis. Annually, before the season starts, just to provide that emphasis that safety never goes out of style. It's one of those things that should be emphasized in every farm. And I'd like to express some acknowledgement here. Our deepest sympathy and gratitude to the baler farm worker's father for aiding in this investigation. He gave details and information. And I'd like to acknowledge the hay owner who employed the farm worker for all his assistance and information. And there's a lot of information and input received from baler manufacturers as well as others involved in agriculture across the state of Michigan. I just want to say that. It does not constitute an endorsement by the MyFace program for the things that we're talking about here. We're not responsible for content on the websites, but I emphasize that we use these as a training and educational tool. So this program does this really, and it's in place across the country where people can find out about fatalities on farms. And we all know that farming is the second most dangerous occupation in the country, second only to mining. And like I say, every farmer, every farm has a story Well, I just think that those stories are um, could be prevented, some of them. But I know that there were some contributing factors to why this happened on the farm. One, he wanted the best quality and he didn't want rain to ruin that hay. I get it. Uh, we've already talked about how delaying cutting, delaying harvest can affect the quality. We talked about relative feed value. We talked about TDN. All those things decrease as we wait or it gets rained on. There's lots of data suggesting that a rain on hay will decrease it by 3, 5, 7, 10, 15%, depending on how much rain you actually see on a hay that's been cut. Factor two, unable to restart the baler without dumping potential partially baled hay. Well, that's a real thing too. Put a lot of time and effort into baling this hay, and we want to make sure that it's done the right way. Factor three, unable to rotate feed mechanism to release the bound material. And that's a design issue that I think the manufacturers are getting better and better all the time. They understand that things happen as far as balers being plugged. Some of it depends on how it was cut, how it was raked, how it was handled, tedded, all those things. Merging, those all work together. And factor four, potential for mechanical damages to the baler. One thing that I didn't include in this presentation, but I'm going to bring it up now, is that there was a open can of beer on the tractor and another one in a cooler. It was not significant in his bloodstream, but I'm going to say that any alcohol will slow down your reflexes. And so it's important never drink and work on the farm around very powerful machinery. So I said this earlier, but engineering improvements have occurred and that safety and design is there and it helps for the clearance of those plugs and those clogs, not requiring a full shutdown. And that's a good thing. But I want to bring this back to the economic side of things, enough on the factors because it's a tragedy and we all understand that. But I want to bring it back to what it means to a farm when that happens. And I'm using the best information that I could find. A study done between 2003 and 2006, they talked about the societal costs were nearly $800,000 in agriculture, forestry, and fishing fatalities. And so when I adjust that for inflation, it's about $1.2 million on that farm per fatality. So those societal costs were estimated using the cost of illness approach, which combines direct and indirect costs to yield an overall cost of that fatality on that farm and that injury. And we all know, and maybe we don't all know, but we have seen the material overturns, tractor overturns are the most frequent cause of death on farms at a rate of 96 per year. Still today, in 2025, I have seen stories about tractor overturns and fatalities in Michigan this year. The occupational fatality rate for farmers is 5 times higher than other industries. And this blew me away when I read this last bullet point. 7 out of 10 farms go out of business within 5 years of a tractor overturn fatality. And I'm going to say that's probably true for any fatality on a farm. It devastates the family. If a wife loses a husband, or a father loses a son, or a husband and wife loses son or daughter, it doesn't have to be just men, it's daughters too, working on farms today. It it's a deep toll on that family, not only economically, but also emotionally, spiritually. It devastates the entire family and those that are involved. And because of that, there's some things to consider. So I want to ask the question of all of you that are on here, and for those that are going to view this later on, what is the cost of a newer versus a used baler? Is the $21,000 to update that old baler that maybe doesn't have the safety components built into that baler compared to the $1.2 million societal costs? Only you can answer that question. Only you can really say yes or no. But as I think it was Sarah said earlier, it depends. Well, what are your circumstances? But I'm going to say, yeah, 21,000 is a lot cheaper than 1.2 million by far. We have a great program in Michigan for farm stress, and any farm that goes through a fatality or has a major medical challenge, that person may be sidelined for months and depression may sink in or things happen. They have extra costs that are associated, but we have a great farm stress program in Michigan in managing farm stress, and I think most other states do too, have information and resources available. We have what we call a teletherapy program, and I would hope that it's available in all states, but farmers can call in and talk to somebody that knows farming and knows how to talk to farmers about stress. And there's also the suicide prevention line, 988. Don't be afraid to talk about suicide with somebody that's in depression. They may thank you later on, but it's not something that should be avoided. I think that stigma is long gone. We understand that stress is a big part of what goes on farms, just inherent with weather, animals, crops, all those things. 988, the hotline, they're 28, I mean 24/7, 365 days a year that they're available. And let me just finish with this and say that no bale of hay is worth a life. Everybody that's out there baling hay today, they need to think safety. One of my my good friends that I've met working with Extension, he got caught underneath a planter earlier this spring. He said, "Why am I doing this?" He was working alone. He wasn't hurt badly, but he could have been killed. He said, "I'm going to rent my farm out." So I want you to think safe, work safe, and come home safe because there are people depending on all of us when we're out there on the farm. There's a lot of websites that are available, and I will have this available for Fred as we finish up. My slides will be available if you'd like to use them. Just make sure that we get a little credit there. And there are some websites that, excuse me, are available. I put an article together about safety first for forage balers and harvesters. And then the MyFace assessment evaluation is available online as well for people to read. And it's gut wrenching. It really is. So with that, Fred, I'm going to stop sharing. And if there are questions or anything that would people like to talk about, I'd be glad to answer any questions or concerns or comments.
I've got a question before Sarah comes into it. As we are looking at, very old equipment versus good used equipment, we know combines have really skyrocketed in price. Tractors, just pre-def tractors are really expensive. What are you seeing for alfalfa or baling equipment that's, got some of these safety things on it? Has that price really rocketed in your area?
Fred, all new equipment, all really good used equipment has skyrocketed in price. When I look at the choppers that these guys are using for the custom harvesters, you're talking $1 million for those harvesters. So there's a tremendous amount of investment for anyone that is working with farms and farming equipment today. I don't think it's any different in Michigan with hay equipment than it is anywhere else. It's a big investment, and people need to count the cost ahead of time because there are going to be uh, ups and downs, just like Amber said, on what happens out there as far as our prices and pay stocks, all those kinds of things.
Any questions, other questions, Sarah?
Well, I was just going to say, Phil, this is a great presentation. I mean, I do a lot of different things on safety with pesticides, but we don't talk about equipment safety very often. And we have one person really with South Dakota Extension that focuses on safety with equipment, and they're on the youth side, they're on the 4-H side, the way we're organized. But this one hits home. When I was, gosh, 18 or 19, I went out and worked on a ranch for a couple summers in western South Dakota just for a different experience, and just worked as a ranch hand there. And the second summer, the first summer I was there, my boss's grandson, who I knew well, was doing something similar to what this guy was doing. He was 18, maybe, not even. He hadn't graduated high school yet, I guess. So he was 16, 17 years old. He had started his own custom haying business, and he was out haying with some, what we figured out was tree wrap, actually. He was testing a new product for someone, and they think it was, the tree wrap was kind of wrapped up in the bale. So they think he grabbed it, maybe, because it had wadded up. And he was baling with a child. I mean,
Oh my.
the kid was like 13, or he was raking. That the kid was raking. So, needless to say, the 16-year-old did not survive, and the 13-year-old was out, 20 miles from anywhere with him alone. So it's a real thing. I mean, it happened, and I was there after the fact and had the horrible honor of bailing around that baler sitting there. So it's a real thing. Yeah. So I think this is a great presentation, and they can scoff at you all they want, but as soon, that's just what people do because we're so used to it. And the guys that put up a lot of hay will bail all night long, and not my husband won't think twice about it. But you get tired and you get complacent, and that's when accidents happen. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you're doing this, and hopefully you can, it hits home with a few people enough to really think about it, especially people with employees.
Thank you very
I,
much.
I have just one more comment based on what Sarah said, and I'm going to retire in August, and I've been doing a lot of safety programs this past year because I just think it's the most important thing that I can do. And I have a list that I just started writing down on the friends that I know personally, farmers that have talked to me or I've been on their farms, and I went through the accidents that were involved, and I ran out of room on one page. It was double spaced, but I ran out of room on one page. And on that one page, I had um, about 20, 28 or 29 really tragic accidents. 15 of them were fatalities. And these are people that I know. The farms never recovered. That they just they don't. So anybody that says you can't prevent accidents, I'm here to say that yes, you can. You have to be diligent about it and really think ahead. And they are preventable. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm going to start by asking, are you seeing my display sign?
We're
You
seeing the
need,
wrong side, Fred.
yeah, you
All
need to
right.
switch your display.
Give me-
And I should say, so Fred has done all the work on this webinar. Thank you, Phil, by the way. Fred's been doing the work on the back end of these webinars, but now he signed himself up to talk too. So I don't know if he's just trying to work double time or didn't want to hear from me because I don't really have anything prepared, so I'm really glad that Fred's doing this. So Fred is actually the dairy specialist. I don't know if you introduce yourself, Fred. You're out in Orange City, right? Your office
Yeah.
is in Orange City, Iowa. And Fred does just a lot of work in the dairy world, and he's well known in the forage world in this area too, in our region, in and outside of Iowa. And I think the first time I met him, I went to a silage field day that he had put on, and I thought, oh, this guy knows something. I should really get to know him. So we're going to hear from Fred on a hay market outlook, and thanks for being willing to talk and host, Fred.
Thank you very much. Are you seeing the right slide now?
Yes.
All right, very good. That part of the beauty of following Amber is that magazine does such a fantastic job that you're going to recognize some of these slides. We get a lot of information from USDA, but then the Hay and Forage Bureau really compiles a lot of good information. So my program just went down to about 12 or 15 minutes instead of the 12:30. But what I'm going to start is not a lot of technology in this slide, but when I think hay, this is what comes to my mind. Big round bales weren't a thing back when I was starting. And some of us, I mean, my dad always talked about the one row corn silage cutter. I talk about square bales. So you go ahead and start. After the price declined in 2024, hay prices have kind of settled into a lower range. Increased forage production last year, saw more tons of forage out there. As we head into the 2025 growing season, weather and politics look to be the most important factors in hay production. The first new crop alfalfa at Rock Valley saw prices over $230 a ton. First cutting grass at $120. Next sale saw those prices faltered by almost double digits. This past week, we saw alfalfa top at 137 and grass at 135. So we know that this isn't the brightest spot for hay producers. I believe that, there are four things that really drive the market any year we look at it. First, as Amber said, is weather. Exports, we probably don't see the exports. We feel them, but if you're on the West Coast, when exports are happening because those brokers are scooping up hay and putting it on ships. And then obviously demand. I'm going to talk just a little bit about profitability. I think as producers, we have to understand that this is all about the lifestyle, but we also have to make some money. You look at the hay drought areas. You saw the map on the right before. Compared to last year, drought had a somewhat greater concern as we entered the new crop as of June 10th drought report. 29% of alfalfa hay acreage and 19% of hay acres were reported in drought-affected areas. However, recent rain along our I-29 corridor has really mitigated a lot of acres for that. The current reported range conditions, which is, a little more western off of the I-29 corridor, reports conditions at 51% of our far west are in poor to very poor condition. 42% of Nebraska pastures and ranges are in poor and very poor. Additionally, 38% in Wyoming, 24% of South Dakota ranges are in poor to very poor. Texas is reporting 30%. On the other extreme, Missouri reports just 1% of pastures in poor condition, and Oklahoma at 6%. Among the top 10 beef cow states, Kentucky also reports just 5% of pastures. Drought is not a factor across the southern row of the Gulf Coast. So, we've got to remember forage is not just one location. Trucks load hay and move them a lot of distances. The U.S. is a leading hay exporter with top export markets including China, Japan, and South Korea. However, after the tariffs were announced, some export orders, guys were stockpiling. They put orders in to beat the tariffs, but once tariffs were announced, a lot of those orders were canceled. China, which represented about 30% of U.S. forage exports in 24, already reduced alfalfa purchases. And this kind of sets up what we saw in 2018 and 19 when China sourced hay from other regions, which shifted our exports to some of the Middle East buyers. But that's not going to take all the hay that we traditionally ship. If this tariff saga continues to disrupt trade, Western exporters could face significant challenges, which moves east to us. We could see a lot of hay prices slipping from where they currently. Sometimes we forget that the hay market is actually a global market. Right now, it's expected that in US dollars, we'll see 151, almost 152 billion by 2034. That's up from what we're seeing right now, about $88 billion. And that's 5.6% growth from 2025 to 2034. We know North America is 43% of the world hay exports, and that just shows that our producers know how to produce quality hay. When we look at, and you saw this slide before, you can see the hay stocks production and other hay production. But what I want to point out is hay crop inputs have went up substantially over the past several years, but some of those two have moderated. However, fertilizer remains a wild card. Prices are higher than a year ago, and recent tariffs have threatened to make this situation even worse. Hay growers have to really remain diligent about getting the right fertilizer on the crop, making sure that it can be utilized. I know I was going to use the hay mantra that Amber talked about because I've heard it for many, many years. I think it holds true when we're not at the top prices in our marketplace. High quality hay always sells for a premium price, and it doesn't cost any more to roll up quality hay than to roll up poor quality hay. Making quality hay is the quickest way to widen profit margins for producers. We mentioned that some of the largest hay producing states have significant year-over-year stock gains. And I only put this in to make, folks understand when we say gains, Wisconsin's up 167%, Minnesota's up 146, Texas is up 100%. That's a lot of hay we're talking about if you look at that chart. Now, if you look conversely, there's some major hay producing states that experience some notable inventory reduction. Mexico's down 55%, West Virginia's down 54%, Ohio's down 47%. So all hay production, hay pricing is all local. These are the stocks, you've seen this from Amber. This past December, year-over-year stocks jumped 4.8 million tons. And as she pointed out, the 24 million tons is the highest reported since 2017, when the nation's hay inventory totaled nearly 24.4 million tons. Disappearance is a big part of what stays in the barn or what gets fed. Prior to 2011 and 12 drought years, disappearance from hay barns was always in the 80 million to 85 million ton range. Since 2012, it's rare to have a year when disappearance exceeded 70 million tons. And during 6 of the past 7 years, hay feeding has been under 65 million tons. I mentioned profitability when we started, and I want producers to understand that every community there's producers that are making money with their hay crop. There's also producers that are not making money. When we look at figures like this, they're national averages from USDA, and we can say that hay is slightly unprofitable, neutral 12-month outlook. Timothy hay is slightly profitable, but that depends on what our export demand is going to look like. So again, it depends. Average monthly hay prices, you can get this figure every month from USDA that will last since 2023. That's not the right trend line we want to see. However, if we look at this, 3 states have had month-over-month price gains during February, which is the most recent one I pulled up, with one sporting a double-digit increase, and that's Arizona, $20 per ton increase. California and Washington were both up. 5 states were basically neutral. And if you look at the USDA figures, Iowa had the largest average price decline for alfalfa with $12 per ton. And other states in the Midwest, Illinois in particular, had a $10 per ton decline. This is what I look at every month, both alfalfa and grass. You can see they put the premium, good, fair, and then we do the same thing for the grass seed. I think it's important as a producer that you understand what your market's going to look like. We can wish and hope for $225 alfalfa, even Northwest Iowa, but that's probably not going to be the case unless we see a significant even drought really sets in fall, and we get a lot of flooding that causes disease spread. So I cut down my presentation quite a bit. That's simply because Andrew did a fantastic job of going over some of the same points that I did. So at this point, I'd say if we get other questions, let's see if we can develop some discussion. Otherwise, we may have a short evening. Don't see any questions coming.
Brett, I've got a question for you, and it has to do with alfalfa in general. Across the country, we're seeing alfalfa acres drop significantly. And personally, I've seen a drop in dairy ration percentages for alfalfa for many years. Is there going to be an opportunity for alfalfa to rebound? It's a great crop to grow. I know that there's a lot of research that has dropped out of the loop when you think about the number of companies that are actually developing new varieties and working on improvements for yield and other things. But there's a lot of questions wrapped up into what I just asked you.
A couple of things that I really want to bring to light. Right now, we have moved from a 30% corn silage ration and the alfalfa, corn stalks, whatever, to now we're talking a 60% ratio. Corn is easy to grow. It's got a tremendous amount of energy. It packs good, it stores good, and, you know, it's just got a lot of things here in the upper Midwest that works well. I came up out of Texas. You're not going to see corn silage the same way. A great field of corn in the panhandle of Texas is 90 bushel corn. We're going to see, unless we see a real change in this season, we could see some 280. You know, that's 30 plus bushel and 30 plus tons of corn silage. So I think what's available influences it. The other thing is that if you look at a lot of grazers, if you look at a lot of herds that have the opportunity to work with quality grass, they've got a lot of milk being produced with that. They've got a lot of healthy cows. Yeah, I think, quite frankly, alfalfa is not as in demand that when I was on the farm, we knew we had to have alfalfa to make milk. And I think now we're seeing corn silage take that over, and we're seeing some of the new grasses that are really becoming pretty popular and running through the shredder and get them into the team line. So I don't know if I answered your question. That's what I'm saying.
I'm not so sure there is an answer.
Is Amber still on? Did I ruffle any feathers by saying 70, 60, 70% corn silage rations?
No, you didn't ruffle any feathers. That's a fair observation.
And I know we've talked about this before, but I really think there's some opportunities out there that aren't just one cool season grasses. I think we're going to see some of these new cocktails mixes that bring in some new, like I mentioned, crabgrass. You know. When I planted that up in Nashua, Iowa, my neighbor told the other neighbor that guy's insane. Oh, he ever put chicory and crabgrass in the yeah, see. Okay. I'd like to remind folks that we have this program every month. And next month, we will have the head of the USDA hay report. Jorge will be one of our presenters. And Dr. Anderson from Minnesota will talk about horse hay. I know a lot of our producers kind of see that as the golden apple. They make the right kind of hay that can charge and do well on that. So we'll see what she has to say about horse hay. Any closing comments, Amber, Bill?
No, just thank you for the program and thanks to everyone with us tonight.
Bill, any comments?
Same for me, Fred. Thanks for the opportunity and keep growing alfalfa. That's what I say.
Very good. Well, thanks, everybody. We appreciate you being part of the program and appreciate the folks who listened.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you
Hope
much.
your son's doing well.
Thank you.
How's he doing?
He is doing well. He has his first, for those who didn't know, my son was studying.
Yeah, speaking of accidents,
He was starting a research project, moving some feed, and the floor jack rolled over the top of him, and he had to have his patella and tendon put back together. So Friday, he's going back to the surgeon and then take a look and see how it's going. It seems to be doing okay. Thank you, folks. We will end the program.